In the early 1900s, white Americans didn't just believe humanity was divided into races. They believed Europeans themselves were biologically different from one another, and scientists used IQ testing to differentiate between European ethnic groups, prove Anglo-Saxons were at the top, and to help reshape U.S. immigration policy. The story begins with French psychologist Alfred Binet, who designed intelligence tests to identify students who needed extra support. But in the U.S., psychologist Henry Goddard repurposed these tests to rank human intelligence. Around the same time, immigration to the United States was rapidly increasing. Groups like the Immigration Restriction League warned that newer immigrants were weakening America's racial and intellectual future. Some even argued that inferior populations should be prevented from reproducing in order to protect the nation's quality. They strongly believed that the U.S. needed to maintain an Anglo-American majority and do everything possible to prevent the risk of interbreeding with lesser Europeans. At Ellis Island, officials wanted faster ways to identify immigrants they considered undesirable. They invited Henry Goddard to help administer intelligence testing for new arrivals to decide on who got to stay and who got to turn around and get back on the boat. Without warning, exhausted immigrants were tested in English, a language most did not speak, and American culture, a culture none were assimilated into yet. But the researchers still claimed the results measured innate intelligence. The official reports from these tests, according to Goddard, found that the intelligence of what they referred to as third-class immigrants was low, perhaps moron grade, and that the immigrants of the early 1900s were of a decidedly different character from the earlier generations of immigrants. He found that out of 1,000 Polish immigrants, all but 103 are laborers and servants. And according to their findings, 83% of Jews, 79% of Italians, 80% of Hungarians, and 87% of Russians were feeble-minded. These numbers help spread the idea that Southern and Eastern Europeans were naturally inferior to Anglo-Saxons. In 1923, Princeton psychologist Carl Brigham published a study of American intelligence, which ranked groups by mental age and promoted racial hierarchies, conveniently placing Northwestern Europeans at the top. Brigham and others also used racial categories like Nordic, Alpine, and Mediterranean, often based on skull measurements and ideas about racial blood. These ideas helped justify immigration restrictions and exclusion laws in the 1920s and reinforced the belief that America needed to preserve its Anglo-Saxon character. The very idea of a white American being a mutt, as in a mix of different breeds, stems from Anglo supremacy. Even if a person who's used this phrase to describe themselves understands that Europeans aren't actually made up of different races or breeds, the idea itself came from this history, making the past more relevant than some might think.